Welcome to another NYSAC webinar, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in this webinar. Today, we will be presenting a program on New York State Community Development Block Grant CARES Act funding opportunities. NYSAC would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, Nationwide. Nationwide Retirement Solutions is one of the nation's leaders in defined contribution plan administration. Nationwide provides plan administration and record keeping for public sector 457, 401A, and 403B plans. Nationwide has been a longtime sponsor of NYSAC educational programs, and we greatly appreciate their support for today's webinar. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Jeanette Stanziano, NYSAC's Director of Education and Training. Jeanette.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Just a couple of items for housekeeping measures. We will be recording this program today and posting it with a PDF of the slide deck on NYSAC's website at nysac.org. It should be posted by, I'd say, 1:30 today. It takes a little while to transform into an MP4. We'd also like you to know that we encourage you to submit questions, and the way that we ask you to do that is through your dashboard. You just click on the the questions tab, and type in your question at any time during the program, submit it, and we will get to it during the Q&A at the end of the program, read questions live to our presenters for a response. I think that's about it. Ryan, back to you.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. And so for our listeners today, we have two speakers from New York State Homes and Community Renewal, Scott LaMountain and Charlie Fillion. They're both program directors within OCR. Charlie is the program director for State Community Development Block Grant Program for Public Infrastructure, Facilities, Housing, and Community Planning. And Scott is the program director at CDBG for Economic Development. With a combined experience of more than 35 years, we're very lucky and fortunate to have both of these leaders within New York State OCR with us this morning to talk about some funding opportunities right now that counties are eligible to apply for. So with that, I won't take up any more time. I want to turn it over to Scott LaMountain.
Okay, well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning. Again, this is Scott LaMountain presenting with Charlie Fillion. We're with the New York State Office of Community Renewal. And today we're going to talk about the Community Development Block Grant CARES Act funding and application that's now available. The presentation is going to be provided in several different sections. We're going to summarize the program, talk about how we qualify projects under HUD's national objective, what are some eligible activities, and what does the application process look like. So we'll start with the program summary. Big picture, the New York State Office of Community Renewal, or OCRs, will refer to it, receive CDBG funding to support communities throughout the state by providing funding to provide decent housing and suitable living environments, primarily for lower and moderate income persons. The 2020 Coronavirus Aid Relief Economic Security Act, or CARES, allows CDBG funds to be used to prepare, prevent, and or respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know COVID-19 has presented hardships all over the state. Unlike other CDBG funding rounds, for those that might be familiar, CDBG CV or CARES funds are open to both non-entitlement and entitlement communities. Entitlement communities are those units of local government that receive an annual allocation of funds directly from HUD. So OCR is currently accepting applications for currently available $60 million. $30 million of that 60 is to be awarded specifically to non-entitlement communities. And then the remaining $30 million is available to units of local government statewide. The current funding round is $60 million, but additional funding through the CARES Act will be made available in future rounds to units of local government. As we'll discuss throughout the presentation, CDBG grant has federal program guidelines and requirements that have to be met by grantees. So some of those program guidelines you can see on the slide. There's certain critical thresholds that include but aren't limited to: the project can be completed within 12 months of award. It has to meet one of HUD's national objectives, which we'll speak about. We have to contract with a unit of local government, and there needs to be an explicit tie back to COVID. It needs to prevent, prepare for, respond to coronavirus. So another quick point: even if the proposed project includes a consultant or subrecipient or some other administrative arrangement, the primary applicant must be the unit of local government. So a consultant, subrecipient, nonprofit can't apply on behalf of city, town, village, county. Because HUD has imposed strict expenditure deadlines that we have to adhere to, it's critical that applicants advance projects that can be completed within a reasonably short period of time. So as we said, application period is now open. Applications will be accepted and rolling awards made until 4 p.m. Friday, August 27th, 2021, or until funding has been exhausted. So some other program administrative requirements that we have to consider here. We'll get to eligible activities here in a minute, but HUD is focused on this idea of duplication of benefits. So grantees must have policies and procedures in place to help prevent duplication of benefits with other state and federal resources. So this means simply that grantees can't use CARES funds to cover costs already covered or fully funded by other sources. So this is a really critical step as a variety of state and federal resources have been made available throughout the year, this past year for COVID response. There is a form that we ask to be attached to the application that addresses duplication of benefits. We need to think through procurement. So an applicant can choose to use a third-party consultant or a nonprofit subrecipient, as HUD calls them, to help administer the project. But for professional service contracts, federal procurement rules will apply. So we have a wealth of information on these topics on our website in our grant administration manual, and covered in chapters 1 and 4, which relate to how do you start up a grant, and then again procurement standards. Finally, note that the environmental review process for federal programs, which is known as NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, as well as SEEKR, none of those requirements have been waived, or we have not been provided flexibilities by HUD under the CARES program. The length of time to finish the reviews, NEPA review in particular, is based on the type of activity that's undertaken. Again, we won't spend a lot of time on that here. All of that's available in our grant administration manual, except to say that those processes still have to be observed. We still have to complete environmental reviews for everything that we fund through CARES CDBG. So funding limits, what exactly are we offering here? Minimum request for all applicants is $100,000. Towns, cities, and villages may apply for up to $500,000 independently. Counties and New York City may apply for up to $1 million. So municipalities that wish to apply for multiple activities are encouraged to submit a single application to cover all of those activities, and these applications are limited to $2 million. Understand the maximum award limits are not intended to serve as a target for funding requests. The amount of CDBG assistance has to be based on the extent of need, cannot be used to reduce the amount of other financing in the project. Larger awards may be approved based on demonstrated need and the capacity to complete those projects within the 12-month term. A couple more points on this. Again, if the municipality is planning to apply for multiple activities and for that combined funding limit of $2 million, our intention is to have all of those activities submitted under one application and funded under one contract. All municipalities, including towns and villages, are eligible to apply for that full $2 million if more than one activity is proposed. We want applicants to be realistic about what's feasible and what they're able to accomplish within a 12-month contract time frame. That means commitment, expenditure, and closeout of those activities. We ask in the application that applicants determine how costs were determined and that demand exists for those funds, as well as the ability, again, to finish the project within 12 months. We understand some projects are ready to hit the ground running, can be and will be completed well within those 12 months. So a municipality can submit more than one application under this funding round, and we anticipate under future funding rounds. But we would only expect to see that next application if that first contract is fully committed and has been substantially expended. Again, OCR reserves the right to make exceptions based on need, but that's the general structure. So just quickly, what's different about CV funds? Jeanette, if you advance to the next slide for me. So whether this is your first time applying for CDBG funding or not, you should be aware there's some key differences between the CV or CARES funds and our quote normal CDBG funding. So first and foremost, the most important point here is that every project has to demonstrate a clear connection to this, these 3 points, this prevention, preparing, responding to COVID-19. So due to the unprecedented circumstances surrounding the pandemic, unlike other funding rounds, these funds have to demonstrate that connection. So again, we've touched on this, the contract term. Our normal contracts are 24 months for those that are familiar with our programs, but these have 12-month time frames, which correspond to strict expenditure deadlines HUD's placed on us. Another thing to consider about this funding round is before submitting full application, we are asking, this is a 2-step or a tiered process. There is a consultation form, more or less a pre-application that you can submit to us. We'll discuss that a little bit more in detail later. So if you've applied for CDBG in the past, this is a different funding structure. We're making awards on a rolling basis, and there's this initial pre-application or consultation form required. We've talked about this kind of rolling application structure that we've adopted here. We're going to continue to accept applications again until August 27th. We don't recommend waiting to the last minute, but that said, we want to solicit proposals that are going to result in projects we can advance to our board. So get in touch with us, talk to us about what sorts of ideas you have, or simply submit in a consultation form. There are several different categories of activities for CDBG-CV that we've established, which we'll talk about in a minute. And one of the interesting nuances that we have under CARES relates to our economic development activities, whereas normally we have limits of 35,000 per job tops. HUD has allowed us some flexibilities there. We can go up to 85,000 per job, assuming it's justified in the application. So that's interesting. We can again get in touch with us. We can talk some nuances there. So let's talk a little bit about general categories and eligible activities. The approved use of CARES funds granted to New York by HUD fall under 4 different general categories: small business assistance, public facilities or infrastructure, housing, and public services. We're accepting applications for specific activities within these categories, but understand if you have a project that doesn't appear to fall neatly into any of those 4 categories, we recognize that. And that's why you see the little light bulb on the slide that says special project. So our goal is to try to say yes as much as we can within the confines that's presented by HUD. So if you have something that doesn't fit, special projects. Couple more places here, and then I'm gonna hand it off to Charlie. Let's talk about business assistance, that first category, that first bucket. We're calling it small business assistance. The idea is that you would propose a project where grant funds are made available to support businesses with less than 25 employees. This includes micro enterprises, which is a separate category to HUD, with fewer than 5 employees, as well as small businesses with fewer than 25. So that's 0 to 5, and then the 6 to 25. And these businesses would be ones that have been impacted by the pandemic, but have been unable to access other state and federal resources. While all CDBG-CV economic development activities can satisfy a national objective through the creation or retention of jobs held or made available to low and moderate income people, micro enterprise activities, again, that's that lowest tier, the 0 to 5, they can also meet HUD's criteria if they themselves, the owner, is low or moderate income. Our intention is to offer this assistance on a programmatic basis. So for example, there could be a blended program of both micro enterprises 0 to 5, and then small businesses 6 to 25 employees that are blended under the same application. And the idea is that it would operate under one program, drawing from the same pool of resources to fund those activities. Funds can be deployed to address improvements that support customer and staff safety, improve business resiliency related to future occurrences of the virus or other disasters. We can talk a little more about specific examples here during the Q&A. If we go to the next slide, a couple other things about business assistance. Businesses will be required to demonstrate job retention or creation to access those funds. So when we say national objective, that is the criteria by which we can fund these projects. So for economic development, it is job retention or creation. But at the same time, we have to demonstrate how those funds will enable the business to respond or prevent impacts of COVID-19. So there's that kind of COVID connection or tie back. Minimum of 51% of the jobs that are created or retained as a result of the award must be either held by or made available to lower moderate income persons. Held by means that the time their employment starts, that person is a member of a family whose income falls at or below the applicable Section 8 income limits as published by HUD. Jobs made available to, if the position doesn't require special skills from training or work experience, and the education beyond high school is not a prerequisite to employment. There are administrative program delivery funds or soft costs associated with the grants. For small business assistance, the overall soft costs are not to exceed 15%. So that's grant administration, program delivery, and training, with administration itself not to exceed 5%. We will, in certain situations, consider standalone economic development projects, meaning one business. However, we would want to have that discussion and make a determination about how that will impact the rest of your business community and what sorts of opportunities are out there. And a quick final point here. This last slide on small business assistance shows you some potential activities that could be considered under small business. Jeanette, if you'll advance the slide for me, there we go. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, and I would say since we've drafted the presentation, we've learned a little bit, so we can certainly talk during the Q&A or certainly reach out to us afterward. But you can see on the slide, new point of sales equipment to allow social distancing, working capital to help market new digital offerings of a product or service, soft costs such as rent, insurance, inventory to help stabilize the business, purchase of equipment or hiring employees to maintain new cleaning protocols. Really, the question is, what does the business environment look like post pandemic, and how can we help reposition businesses to be successful? So with all of that, I'm going to hand it off to Charlie to take away the next section here.
Great, thanks, Scott. So let's talk about public facilities and infrastructure projects. These projects generally involve acquisition, construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, or installation. Funds may not be used to support general operation expenses for local governments or improvements to buildings used for the general conduct of government. Places like the city or town hall where municipal government employees operate cannot be funded by CDBG. However, grant funds will be made available to assist municipal public facilities, nursing homes, libraries, homeless shelters, senior centers, supportive and public housing developments, and other critical institutions with reconfiguration and physical adjustments to comply with social distancing, reduced occupancy, and other requirements following the COVID pandemic. Improvements will increase environmental and structural safety in public facilities. In these facilities that benefit the entire jurisdiction and do not have limited public access are eligible for public facilities and infrastructure projects. Applicants who are unsure if a facility is eligible are encouraged to consult with OCR. Uses may include physical redesign of the existing facilities to encourage reduced density, redesign and improvement of air filtering or ventilation systems, acquisition, development of underutilized properties to expand public facilities and public space, redevelopment or design of a facility to serve a dual purpose such as the shelter for future disaster events. Funds will be made available as an infrastructure activity to ensure that families in underserved communities have Wi-Fi access for remote education and telehealth services through new and expanded broadband. Applicants must identify connectivity projects that can be completed within 12 months. CDBG grant funds can be provided to directly support the cost of delivering these critical programs to New York's most vulnerable populations at a local level. For housing improvements, increased time in the home is increasing the risk of lead poisoning for families in New York State. The connection between health and quality housing is well established, and addressing the safety and quality of New York's housing stock has never been more critical given the recent crisis requiring sheltering in place and reducing density in both public and private spaces. Grant funds can be made available to assist rental and single-family homeowners with repairs or upgrades critical to improving the overall health and safety of the housing. In addition to lead remediation, funds may be used to address ventilation and HVAC improvements related to indoor quality, reconfiguration of communal spaces, other repairs that address emergencies and allow families to shelter safely at home. The assistance will help to prepare for and prevent future occurrences of the virus by making investments to reconfigure and update living spaces and physical systems for low and moderate income families. Additionally, the pandemic has increased commercial vacancies and generated an increased need for affordable and supportive housing. CDBG funds can be a critical component for addressing the needs of families and individuals experiencing homelessness or housing challenges as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. HCR will therefore accept applications for the repair of residential building stock or for the acquisition and conversion of other vacant structures to create new opportunities for affordable housing or the development of public facilities such as shelters, senior centers, or recreation facilities. Applicants are expected to prioritize to vulnerable populations such as seniors, the severely disabled, and families that lost income as a result of COVID. Public services, this must be a new service or quantifiable increase in the level of service. Funds will be made available to support community-based outreach in low and moderate income areas or to HUD-designated vulnerable or underserved populations to ensure that they are able to locate and access COVID-19 vaccines as they become available. HCR expects that this assistance is primarily coordinated through nonprofit organizations that may provide services and programming to those communities. Uses may also include working with target populations to educate residents about vaccine safety and post-vaccine federal guideline recommendations. The need for mental health services has increased during the pandemic. Applicants may request CDBG funds to support new or expanded mental health services. Grant funds can cover program costs related to domestic violence abuse services, substance abuse treatment and recovery services, suicide prevention, and general mental health services. HCR expects that this assistance is primarily coordinated through nonprofit organizations, that they may provide services and programming to those populations. Consideration should be given to projects that utilize public service dollars to complement other activities undertaken using CDBG-CV funds. Note that the public service activity must be new or expanded service and cannot support activities already funded by other parties. Funds will be made available to ensure that families in underserved communities have Wi-Fi access through new or expanded broadband, also as a public service activity. The connectivity projects must still be completed within 12 months. Public and community service providers expanded existing services and developed new programs to support increase in new community needs during the pandemic as a public service activity. This would be funding for the service and not for the installation, acquisition, or construction of the facility that would provide the service. So let's talk about special projects for a minute. Homes and Community Renewal intends to make coronavirus funds available to best served needs created by the COVID-19 pandemic. Applications that meet HUD-mandated nexus to COVID and its CDBG national objective may be considered for funding. Applicants that identify a critical need that falls outside of the above activities, but which are within the 4 categories approved by HUD, should contact HCR to discuss the proposal. For example, a standalone business assistance may be eligible, but must demonstrate a significant need. If we go to the next slide, recovery costs prior to the application. Traditionally, CDBG funding cannot be used for costs incurred before submitting the application. For CDBG CV funding, certain pre-award costs may be eligible back to January 21st, 2020. Applicants must demonstrate that the cost was associated with preventing, preparing, or responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. If a grantee cannot meet all the requirements of 24 CFR Part 58 as part of the National Environmental Policy Act review and cannot demonstrate that there was no environmental harm committed, the pre-application costs cannot be reimbursed with HUD funds. Any entitlement communities receiving New York State CDBG funds will be bound to the above activities or will be subject to an amendment of the Entitlement Communities Action Plan. Please contact OCR to determine applicability. For more information, please see Chapter 2 of the New York State CDBG Grant Administration Manual, Environmental and Historic Review. So, ineligible activities, what are they? And again, before we move on from the eligible, we would like to discuss a few reasons why inactivity may be ineligible. This is a general list of ineligible activities. Activities for New York State CDBG projects that do not have a connection to preparing, preventing, or responding to COVID are not eligible. Additionally, projects that cannot be completed within 12 months will not be awarded. Examples of projects that do not meet national objective would be when the group of proposed beneficiaries are less than 51% low and moderate income persons or urgent need. We'll be discussing the national objectives next. When in doubt, again, please contact the email. It's cdbgcares@nyshcr.org with any inquiries or questions. So let's cover the national objectives that all proposed activities will need to meet. Each project proposed for HUD assistance must meet a national objective, or NO, as defined by HUD. For most projects, this objective can be met by ensuring that at least 51% of the beneficiaries assisted are low to moderate income households and/or individuals. In addition, the national objective can be met through urgent needs. These projects are defined narrowly by HUD and generally cover certain emergency situations that present immediate public health threats, such as those that come about from natural disasters. OCR will strive in every case to qualify projects and their activities under the LMI national objective before considering urgent need. Again, please reference Chapter 5 in the Grant Administration Manual and the request for applications for more information about national objectives. Direct links are embedded in the slide. This is a general guide to help meet national objectives by activity type. Applicants are strongly encouraged, again, to consult with OCR staff through CDBG CARES@nyshcr.org about these requirements. Applicants must describe how the standard will be met, and any relevant supporting information must be attached at the time of application. If we go to the next slide. Benefiting low to moderate income persons alone is not a national objective. It must fit into one of the identified activities described. LMA, or low and moderate income area benefit, this is public or community facilities, can use this to meet a national objective by demonstrating at the time of application that over 51% of the persons served are low and moderate income. This is most frequently done through neighborhood income surveys or through a survey of all users of the facility. Census data may be used only where it can be definitively shown that the service area of the facility perfectly coincides with the census block group or tract. LMC, or limited clientele, these are activities in this category provide benefits to a specific group of persons rather than everyone in the area. This can be used to meet a national objective for public facility projects such as senior centers. LMH, or low-mod housing, this is for all housing activities. The household occupying the assisted unit must be determined to be low and moderate income at the time of assistance. This is the most frequently accomplished by gathering all income sources and projecting future income over the next year. For multifamily projects, a majority of the assisted units must be occupied by low and moderate income households. HUD provides an online income calculator. It's HUD Exchange info/income calculator/. Some others, the LMC-MC, applies under the Micro Enterprise Program. This national objective can be met if the owner of the business is determined to be from a low and moderate income household at the time of assistance. The most recent tax returns are required to document LMI status. LMJ, this is used for job creation or job retention, is for economic development, small business, and micro enterprise activities, and is based on full-time equivalent jobs created or retained. 51% of all jobs created must benefit low and moderate income persons by being taken by or made available to or both. Family income forms as provided by OCR through a template are required to document household income based on the current HUD income limits. Point of note for job retention, in order to consider jobs retained as a result of CDBG assistance, there must be clear and objective evidence that permanent jobs will be lost without CDBG assistance. That is number one. Evidence that the business has issued a notice to affected employees or made a public announcement to that effect. Or two, analysis of relevant financial records which clearly and convincingly show that the business is likely to have cut back employment in the near future without the planned intervention. And finally, we have urgent need. These projects are defined narrowly by HUD, as we said before, and generally cover certain emergency situations that present immediate public health threats, such as those that come from natural disasters. As mentioned previously, OCR will strive in every case to qualify projects and their activities under the LMI national objective before considering urgent need. Projects meeting the urgent need national objective must demonstrate that, one, the condition resulting in the need for the proposed activity is of recent origin or recently became urgent, such as a condition that developed or became critical within 18 months prior to the application. The nature and immediacy of conditions pose a threat to the health and welfare of the community. And three, the applicant is unable to finance the proposed activity on its own and other resources are not available to fund the proposed activity. That covers this. I'm going to hand it back to Scott for a few minutes. He's going to take you through and talk about the application process.
All right, thanks, Charlie. So we've hopefully learned a little bit about the CARES program and the kinds of things that we're expecting to see. But let's talk about how it actually works and how we move through the application process. So you can see the graphic on the slide kind of outlines the steps involved. But that step one is to submit a project consultation form, which we touched on earlier. That's that essentially pre-application that we'll see first. That gives us a quick overview of what the project is you're proposing. Step two involves OCR staff review of that form. Afterward, OCR staff will share feedback with your community, may request additional documentation. We have been scheduling calls for each and every consultation form that come in, so we will have the opportunity to talk directly and discuss how we can craft your proposal to be the best that it can possibly be. If the consultation form is approved, the applicant will move on to step three, which is the submission of a full application. As you're putting together the pieces required for that full application, that fourth step, critical, is the public hearing, which is part of HUD's citizen participation requirements that the unit of government hold a public hearing. Step five is submitting the final application with all the required documentation included. And again, that whole time you're interacting with that single mailbox, CDBG CARES mailbox. So if we go to the next slide, we can see for step one, this is what the project consultation form looks like. The idea here is that by submitting this, we're confirming activity eligibility and providing a portal to provide technical assistance prior to the submission of the full application. What we want to make sure is that the project's eligible for CDBG assistance, it will meet a national objective, as Charlie discussed, and that it meets or provides a connection and a strong tie back to COVID-19. So our assistance at this stage will be based on the information that you provide to us in the consultation form and over phone calls. The form is available with all of the other funding round materials right on our website and must be submitted to CDBG CARES at nyshcr.org. So on the next slide, we can see steps 2 and 3. Upon review of that project consultation form, and if we all agree that it makes sense to move forward, we'll simply send an email that serves as an approval to move forward and submit the full application. Step 3 is to actually submit that full application once we've given approval. And just for transparency's sake, all of those materials are available right on our website, right? So you don't, it's not the availability or the opportunity to see the full application is not gated behind anything. It's all right there. You can take a look at what you're getting into before you fill it out. Step 4, we want to park on that for a second. As we said, there is this pre-application requirement of a public hearing. So if we go to the next slide, units of local government must conduct a public hearing, not a meeting, but a public hearing before a quorum of the full legislative body. So not a division of local government, not the planning department, quorum of the legislative body. And that's in compliance both with federal requirements and New York State citizen participation requirements. And all of that must be done prior to submitting that full application for funding. Public hearing template, as well as a one-page explanatory document, is available right on our website. Virtual hearings are permitted. HUD has made that exception during pandemic. We do require 2 public hearings, but only one prior to the full application. So that happens between the initial proposal and then the full application is when you're going to want to start planning for that. For those that are awarded CARES funds, CDBG CARES funds, there is a second public hearing that must be completed before the closeout of that grant. So one before application and then one later towards the end of the project. The requirements for the public hearing are quite prescriptive, so we recommend looking at that one-page guidance document. But you can see on the slide through the graphic, real important pieces here. The municipality has to provide a minimum of 7 days between the publication, the hearing notice, and the hearing itself, with the date of publication day 0. So if we go to the next slide, another quick piece of this here, there is a separate requirement that the hearing notice is conspicuously posted in one or more public locations at least 72 hours prior to the actual hearing. That could also be on the website for the unit of local government. All of the items listed on the slide, and again, this is enumerated in the application documents, all of that has to be attached to the application. If the public hearing requirements aren't met, then the project is ineligible and will lead to delays. So on the next slide, you see step 5. Once an applicant has received approval to submit a full application, applicants must submit an electronic copy of the application to OCR using the information here, again, through that central mailbox. Keep a copy of the application and submitted attachments for your records. Those applications will be accepted through Friday, August 27th on a rolling basis until funding has been exhausted. As we said before, we expect and there will be additional opportunities to apply once we get through August, but this is the initial push. August 27th is the deadline. So the next section, we're going to have Charlie kind of take us out to the end. We're going to talk about some of the groundwork you might want to lay getting ready to apply.
Great, thanks, Scott. So the application threshold requirements, again, CDBG CV applications must present project proposals that include all of the following pieces described in the next few slides. This captures everything we've discussed so far in one list. Prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, meet a CDBG national objective, meet all public hearing criteria, and can be completed within 12 months of award. Continuing with application threshold requirements, applicants must request funding within the limits previously outlined. Please look at these limits closely to determine how your community wants to strategically approach applying for multiple activities. Next, applicants may generally request up to 18% of the CDBG award in program delivery, administration, and engineering costs combined. Of the 18%, administration must not exceed more than 5% of the total CDBG award. Please note that these limits are different with economic development activities, in which case for program administration and delivery, small business assistance programs may request up to 15% of the request in soft costs, with administration not to exceed 5%. And standalone small business projects may request up to $16,000 for administration and program delivery. Additionally, project costs cannot request reimbursement for costs prior to January 21st, 2020. If there were costs incurred after that date or prior to award, they may be considered eligible for CDBG funds. For the application threshold requirements, the project will also need to address one or more of the specified activities listed on this slide. If we go to the next, for the application review criteria, in addition to threshold requirements, applications will be evaluated and scored based on criteria. For need, we want to see a clear description of what the need is and how it is related to COVID-19 by including any quantifiable or concrete information, for example, the number of people or area affected, and is supported by additional documentation such as support letters, architectural engineering reports, or market analysis. Applicants should also provide strong reasoning why CDBG-CV is necessary to complete this project and that efforts to secure other funding have taken place. There's also impact, and the applicants need to describe specific measurable impacts of the project, for example, the number of jobs, housing units, or persons to be assisted, and what the project outlook would mean without CDBG-CV funding. We go to the next slide. In terms of capacity, applications should provide a clear timeline of how the project will be completed within 12 months and provide supporting statement of how the project will be able to meet that time frame. OCR will also look for descriptions of the administrative structure and breakdown of roles and responsibilities, and any procurement processes should be also detailed. Applicants' prior performance review includes the number of project extensions requested and the reason for extensions, unresolved monitoring findings and concerns in the time frame in which they were resolved, status of current grants, such as the expenditure rate, suspension of funds, the adherence to program schedules, and a review of any grant administration issues and how they were resolved in a timely manner for all grants and program years. Next, in terms of feasibility, the applicant needs to demonstrate how the budget is enough to cover the cost for the project, detailing how cost-effective approaches will be used, breaking down administrative soft costs, and describing status of securing current commitments. First and foremost, communities must submit a project consultation form to initiate this process. We want applicants to have some concrete plans or thoughts laid out for having more in-depth conversations with OCR. Once the form is received and reviewed, a call with OCR may be scheduled to discuss more detailed project pieces. Again, for questions or inquiries, please email cdbgcares@nyshcr.org. Embedded here is the website link for the CDBG-CV materials, the website link for the consultation form, the request for applications, etc. If we go to the next slide, so the application tips and common deficiencies, we'll just go over a few of these. We continue to emphasize this first point because a clear connection must be drawn to COVID-19 to be eligible for funds. Not establishing a clear connection will most likely make a project ineligible. Read all instructions related to the required public hearing carefully. If any of the required documents are missing, or if the hearing has not been properly noticed and posted, it will render the application ineligible and the project will be delayed. Please note that the requirement to hold a public hearing and attach an affidavit of publication is not the same thing as posting a copy of the notice at least 72 hours prior to the hearing. We need to see that both were done. The notice, in addition to the legal ad, can be posted either physically at the Town Hall bulletin board or on a website. Photographic evidence is fine. It is also important to note that the public hearing must be held by a legislative body. It cannot be a planning board, the Department of Public Works Committee. Again, it must be the municipality's official legislative body. Next, make sure your local or other funding is committed before you submit your application. Please make sure your commitment is not pending or conditional, and proof of commitment through letters are submitted as attachments. CDBG should be gap financing. That means last in a project, and the project must be completed in 12 months. Please make sure you include a description of efforts taken to secure alternative or additional funds from other public and private sources. Communities should be exploring every resource accessible to them, and those efforts need to be clearly stated when applying for CDBG-CV funding. Rejection letters or supporting documentation should be included as part of your application. Use the checklist. Make sure you submit all the required documents. Applications cannot be submitted by a consultant or subrecipient. They need to be submitted directly by the municipality itself. And finally, some final points here. When developing an application, it's important to demonstrate and document the need for the project through letters of support, engineering reports, market analysis, etc. Similarly, be sure to describe the impact of your project is going to have in terms of jobs created, housing units assisted, or facilities renovated. Your budget must be supported through cost estimates, quotes, or other third-party documentation. Costs must be shown to be reasonable and able to address the need identified in the application. Be sure there's an understanding of the allowable administration and program delivery costs. There are different limits for economic development activities. OCR can assist with interpreting those differences. The applicant must demonstrate that they have administrative capacity to successfully administer the project at the time the funds are awarded. The application must provide strong evidence of how they arrived at the proposed budget by listing sources, estimates, and detailing cost-effective approaches to address the need. Be sure to describe the administration and program delivery activities and the costs associated with these activities, even if you are not requesting CDBG-CV funds to cover these costs. It must be included in the application. Applicants need to pay close attention to admin and program delivery funds for the proposed project so that they do not exceed the allowance. So if we go to, so that concludes the presentation portion of the program. We've been monitoring your questions through the presentation. Please enter questions in the chat or the Q&A windows. Before we answer the questions, we'd like to remind you all the resources available at hcr.ny.gov. You can find the New York State CDBG-CV request for applications in the full grant administration manual there. And with that, Jeanette and Ryan have been monitoring the questions for us, so I'm not sure what's come in.
Yeah, thanks so much, Charlie and Scott. And again, just as a reminder for everyone, you can submit a question through the questions tab of your dashboard. We do have a couple questions at this time, and I'll start off with the first one. And perhaps you may have covered this and I just missed it along the way, but are there any match requirements, local match requirements for these funds?
No, there's no match requirement. Scott, I'll leave that to you to speak to the ED side. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the requirement was for that, but for the infrastructure, the facilities, the housing side, no, there's no matching funds. But again, we have to see that there's the project is fully funded either through CDBG or if the total project cost exceeds the allowable CDBG request, we have to see that all funds are available and committed at the time of application.
Yeah, Charlie, I would add for economic development, there is no required match. But we do have to keep in mind that situations where businesses have received or are in the process of spending down other state and federal resources, whether it's PPP or EIDL, whatever it is, we do have to be careful about duplication of benefits. So, but in the reverse, no, there's no matching requirements. It's really based on need and the demand that you're experiencing within your communities.
Great, thank you both. The next question that has come in is whether or not clean water projects qualify as a special project.
Well, again, they could potentially qualify as a special project, but we have to see what the clear connection is to COVID. We've had a few projects come in, and I'm just going to use some generic terms, some industry standard terms, which is one is the SCADA system that some systems use. There's also this UV treatment system that some systems use for water, either sanitary sewer discharge before it's released into the rivers, or for intake, there's ultraviolet treatment. A lot of these are actions that have been in place and were intended to be addressed prior to COVID, in which case those are not eligible. For something that has come up post-pandemic, then again, we have to see what that there has to be a very clear direct line to COVID, and if somebody can make that, then we can certainly consider it.
Okay, great. This next question is a little technical, and I'll provide my initial feedback, but then if one of you can expand on that, that would be great. And the question is whether or not a county can use this funding combined with the American Rescue Plan funding for a broadband project in their community. The answer would, at face value, from my perspective, would be yes. You can combine and use the two funds. However, you know, on the CDBG side, you know, you have to make sure that you're meeting those, meeting the guidelines within that grant. And for both funds, you cannot use either fund to supplant one or the other. You can use them to supplement each other, but you cannot use them to supplant each other. Charlie, Scott, did you have anything else you want to add?
No, Brian, your point on with that. And again, the other caveat with that, I would just call out again, is that any of these activities that we assist with have to be completed within the 12-month period. So again, we have to look at the overall description of the project. A portion of it may be, you know, it's not just the CDBG funded portion of the project, it's the overall project itself. You have to be able to complete that within 12 months.
That's a good point.
I would add too, Charlie, we have entertained and are in the process of working through a number of broadband internet related, provision related projects. In one of the other barriers, which will be difficult in certain communities, is that the people benefiting from those improvements have to be shown to be primarily low and moderate income. And there are some resources that HUD provides that build off ACS census data that can help make that case, but the project still has to meet all the normal CDBG requirements, right? So we are looking at broadband projects. They won't fit everywhere, but we're excited to see what people have, and certainly let us know if you think it might fit in your community.
Great, thank you both. And then the last question we have is the following. We operate a Meals on Wheels program, and during COVID, we've incurred a high increase in meals, and our current facility has been stretched in its limitations as it also operates as a senior center. The building is over 60 years old. Would building a new facility qualify with this program?
The building would, yes, new construction of a new building, but again, we have to show that it's, you're showing social distancing, health and safety. The other thing is, we have to be realistic, is can that building realistically be built from the ground up within the 12-month period. If we can do that, then yes, that is a potential for assistance.
Great. And that concludes the questions that I've received. I do have one on my end. You know, with respect to the 12-month window of completion, is that a New York State HCR rule, or does that come from the federal government?
That's our guidance, and it's, yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, okay. Greg, we have placed a 12-month restriction on our contracts, and that is a function of severely restricted expenditure deadlines that HUD has placed on us. So working backwards, in order for us to meet HUD's requirements, we have to make sure that we can move the money quickly. So we reserve the right to make exceptions in cases that we deem are extraordinary, but what we're looking to see is that projects can be completed in as short amount of time as possible so that we can meet HUD's requirements.
All right, great. Well, thank you both. And again, I want to thank our sponsor, Nationwide Retirement Solutions. Up on your screen, you have the contact information for Nationwide. And again, they provide plan administration and record keeping for public sector 457, 401A, and 403B plans. So we thank Nationwide again for sponsoring today's webinar. We really appreciate all of the time that Scott and Charlie and their team at HCR have provided to NYSAC. And thank you all for attending today's webinar.
Thanks, everybody.